So today we're going to hit up essential question 10.5, and we are going to try to find out what were the characteristics of the Reign of Terror. Now, 10.4, we led into how did the French Revolution become radical? Basically, like what caused the French Revolution to go from pretty level-headed to bat stuff crazy. Almost, and bat crazy. All right, remember Merd? All right, anyway, so yeah, what caused it to go crazy? And we talked about like all the factors that made it go radical. Well, today we're gonna hit up the Reign of Terror. All right, so like I said, 10.5. What were the characteristics of the Reign of Terror? Pause if you need to. Let's jump right into this. All right, well, here's a picture of the guillotine. Now, I don't really think I talked to you guys about the guillotine very much, but on the left is a great diagram. And essentially, there's a couple things to note here. Now, why did they go to the guillotine? I told you guys this in class, but essentially, it's the Enlightenment, right? People are trying to get rid of cruel and unusual punishment. We talked about that in the Enlightenment. And the common form of executing people back in the day was the headsman's block, where you put your head on a big block and you have an executioner that takes hopefully one chop with a big heavy sword or a big axe. But most likely what ended up happening is 2 chops, 3 chops, 4 chops. It's really bad. And what people figured about the chopping off the heads with the sword or an axe was that caused unnecessary pain and suffering of the person getting executed. Cruel and unusual punishment, right? So this guy named Dr. Guillotin invented a device that did it a whole lot faster and a whole lot more efficiently and always took the head off with one chop. Now, if you notice the blade right here, the blade is slanted. That way, when it hits the head, it slices from one side to the other as it falls. Now, slicing is a whole lot more efficient than if the blade was level and straight across and it chopped, which would sometimes smash the neck rather than cut it off. So now you've got a slicing of the neck that takes the head, like I said, clean off. And it's weighted, so it's really heavy, it falls fast, and it's efficient. And like I said, the people in the French Revolution, when they're guillotining people, they say it's the most painless form of execution there is. But you guys learned about all the stuff I told you about today in class. Now, what you would do is, if you look on the right, they would lay you down on a stretcher with your hands tied and your arms tied so that you couldn't wiggle around and move. And if you look back on the left, see this top part of the board right here, they would raise it up. They would put your head in and they would raise it back down, and that would kind of lock your head in place. Then, as you can see, they would release a lever, which is right here, and the blade would fall, slicing off the neck. Usually, down right in front of where I'm pushing the cursor right here, there would be a basket, and the head would fall into a basket. Sometimes, like we learned about in Louis XVI case, blood would rush out of the neck, and it could be still a pretty gruesome sight. Sometimes, after your head was in a basket, the executioner might pick your head up, show it around to the people, say something like, "Death to the aristocrats," "Death to the enemies of France, long live the Republic," whatever. And I also told you guys sometimes they might defile the head and do inappropriate things with the head to kind of make fun of it. But anyway, it's a pretty gruesome affair. So that's how a guillotine works. So let's jump right into this. The Reign of Terror, okay? The Reign of Terror, guys, reign means rule. If you don't know that by now, the rule of terror. Well, here's the deal. So remember I told you Robespierre is the head of the Committee of Public Safety. And Robespierre has this theory that sometimes you have to use terror in revolutions especially to control people. Now, he says in his writing that basically you have to be virtuous, though. You have to use a morally right kind of terror. In other words, you've got to be using terror for the right reason. Terror for a good cause, okay? Now, I don't know if you guys see the ridiculousness and the hypocrisy of that statement, terror for a good cause, but he did argue that sometimes at the beginning of revolutions, you had to instill fear in people in order to keep order and the revolution to keep going. So Robespierre, the Jacobin, that is the head of the Committee of Public Safety, his big philosophy is if you terrorize France and you create fear in people fear to defy the revolution, fear to speak out against the revolution, then you create order and stability, which allows the revolution to continue. So what was the Reign of Terror? Well, the Reign of Terror was a period of the French Revolution were about 40,000. I said 60,000 in class. I think it's around 40. About 40,000 people were executed in 1 year. Now, to be honest, the Reign of Terror only lasts 1 year, but when people think of the French Revolution, this is what they think about. All right, but like I said, it was only like a 1 year period. Okay, so about 40,000 people were executed in 1 year. All right, about half of those executions came from the guillotine. Okay, because like I said, it was considered a really efficient and humane way to execute people. All right, now Robespierre established courts. All right, now I put courts in parentheses because a lot of these courts are going to end up not really looking at evidence. And like I told you in class, oftentimes if you get hauled in front of these revolutionary courts or tribunals, as they were called, a lot of times you were found guilty and probably sent to what they called Madame la Guillotine. Madame, like Madame Guillotine. So Robespierre established these courts, and the job of these courts was basically to move things along as swiftly as possible. So at times, evidence was overlooked, and people, like I said, went straight to the guillotine. Plus, you guys know that the law of suspects, what that you read about in class, made it really easy for people to get convicted of a crime. All right? So that was the main mode of doing it. And the courts were set up in the major cities of France, and guillotines were set up in many of the major cities of France as well. All right? Now, like I said, many enemies of France were killed by the guillotine. And the guillotine was a bloody affair, as you can imagine. Like I was telling you in class, when I was in Paris, if you go to where the guillotine stood, it's called the Place de Concorde, La Place, like the place, Concorde Place. I think that's where it is. But anyway, if you go there now, there's like a fountain, and it's like no big deal. You could never tell that the guillotine was there. But like I said, it was in a really nice place called the Champs-Élysées today. If you Google Champs, which looks like champs, like champion, Élysée, like Lysses, something like that. If you Google that, it's a really fancy shopping district of France. All right, when I went to Paris, we actually walked down the Champs Elysees and actually bought some, pretty swanky, pretty fancy little clothes there. All right, I still have guys, I still have like a fancy like sport coat I got from the Champs Elysees. But anyway, who cares? Bottom line is, I told you that my tour guide said the streets of the Champs Elysees flowed with blood, and like I told you, it was a big problem with sanitation because dogs would roam around and lick up the blood, and it was just really kind of gross and nasty. All right, because so many people were being executed. All right, and like I said, guys, the blood. If you look at the picture, the blood would leak through the platform and collect down below. Look at the little dog right here. He's like, yeah, give me that blood. Rough, rough. Anyway, that's weird, odd, creepy. Sorry. Anyway, all right. So now it wasn't just the guillotine in ways that people were killed. Let's talk about the city of Nantes in France. All right, remember the Edict of Nantes? Remember that allowed Calvinists, Huguenots to practice their religion. Well, in Nantes, France, a lot of priests and clergy, but other people were executed too, called enemies of France. All right, now I'll explain what's going on with like religion, but a lot of people in Nantes, France, enemies in quotations, including women, children, nuns, and priests, were executed by drowning in a river. So what they did, this is pretty notorious. They put people on these big boats. They rolled them out to the middle of I think it was the Loire River, and they sank the boats, and the people drowned. Now, sometimes I've read primary sources where people would like swim to the shore, where they would have basically a soldier with a heavy thing like a shovel or a hammer, and would then smack them on the face or the head with a hammer to make sure that they are in fact dead. Now, guys, that's pretty gruesome. I kind of gruesome. What did I just say? That's pretty gruesome, guys. I kind of think I'd rather just have the guillotine rather than drowning in a river and getting like smacked on the head when I try to swim ashore. All right. So that was a pretty gruesome thing. Okay. But another thing was in Lyon, France. All right. Or Lyon. I don't know if it's Lyon or Lyon, something like that. But anyway, France. And what happened was, I believe there was a conspiracy in order to basically, once again, these were like friends of the king, and they were trying to put the king's brother back in power. There's like a little rebellion. And what happened there was a group of Jacobin rebel, and then people of the town, many of them, some of them involved, some of them innocent, were massacred by what's called grape shot. Now, grape shot, guys, imagine if you ever go to the store and get a cluster of grapes, right? They're like a bunch of grapes. Well, grape shot is like a cannonball, but the iron cannonballs are tiny that look like grapes. And when they shoot out of the cannon, it has an effect like a shotgun. And it spreads out and it wipes multiple people out at once. Another very gruesome way to die. So the guillotine is what gets the credit for the revolution. It's what people think of. But to be honest with you, about half the execution in France were by guillotine. Others, could include any manner of ways. But bottom line is, people are getting executed now. Why are they killing so many people? Like I said, the government's paranoid and they don't want the revolution to be stopped by anybody speaking out against the revolution. The law of suspects made a dangerous situation where anybody could be an enemy of France. So they are trying to rule through fear. And the philosophy is if people are afraid, then they won't go against the government. All right? So the reign of terror, guys, people getting their heads lopped off daily by the guillotine. And we're going to learn to play a game about the guillotine tomorrow. But anyway, pause if you need to. All right, now, repression of women. Now, so far, guys, in the French Revolution, women like Olympe de Gouges have written things like the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Citizen, and she's made the argument that maybe women should have more equal rights. That was way back, before the revolution got crazy, right? Now, nobody really kind of, jumped on that and said absolutely, because a lot of people in France still believed in Rousseau's, because Rousseau was French in the Enlightenment, Rousseau's idea of like separate spheres for women. Men have the political sphere, women have the, domestic sphere at home. But nevertheless, if you guys remember, in the Levy and Mass, a lot of women signed up to go fight in the war, and some women are going to even serve with distinction. So up until this point, the revolution has been a little bit kind of leaning towards involving women a lot more. Well, that's about ready to go out the hill under Robespierre during the Reign of Terror. So women, if you remember, well, we haven't really talked about this, but women were not allowed to join male political clubs like the Jacobins, right? So what women did was instead they established their own political clubs, and that at first was not forbidden. So do you see, guys, a lot of women are wanting to get involved. Women like Olympe de Gouges are wanting more equality, and they think the revolution is a great time to do this, all right? So women were establishing their own political clubs because they weren't allowed to join the male clubs like the Jacobins. Well, one of them was called the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women, all right? Now, what did these women do? Well, just what the men did. They got together in places where they can meet, and they talked about the political ideas of the day and how France needed to change and get better and all that stuff, right? So another thing that these women did was, do you guys remember the National Convention where the Girondin and the Mountain were talking about, what to do about Louis the 16th and the war and everything like that? Well, a lot of times the women were at the National Convention listening to the debates live and hearing, and they weren't involved in the discussion, but they were there where the discussion was going on. So women are kind of, and I don't want to make it seem like a big, jump forward from where they were, but women are slowly starting to creep into the political sphere. So during the Reign of Terror, women continue this push for equality, and they start, because the revolution's gotten kind of radical, they start to push their ideas a little bit more. They start saying things like, hey, we need stronger price controls to control, bread prices, and we need more equality. Well, remember, this is a time of fear, and the new government under Robespierre sees these women clubs as kind of a threat. They're speaking out against the revolution. Now, so what the Jacobins did was they banned all female political clubs. All right? So Robespierre is very much an Enlightenment guy, and he very much believes in, once again, Rousseau's separate spheres idea, where women's role in society is just not political, it's domestic. Men's role is political. Now, some women speak out, like Olympe de Gouges, this journalist that we talked about, the butcher's daughter, that wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Citizen. She speaks out. She criticizes the government. She criticizes the terror that the government is inflicting. And guess where Olympe de Gouges ends up? She ends up in the arms of Madame Guillotine. All right. So yeah, guys, she gets guillotined in 1793. All right. So wow, man, the guillotine is killing a lot of famous people, but you know what, guys, it's going to keep going. It doesn't just stop there. So after this, also, guys, women were decommissioned from the military and not allowed to serve. So one of the things that you might need to know in a test or in an AP test about the French Revolution is under Robespierre, women kind of like take a step back. Not that they took a huge step forward before Robespierre, but they were even banned from like political clubs under Robespierre. Okay? Pause if you need to. Now, Robespierre and the French government now is what they would consider a republic. There's a small group. Now, the Committee of Public Safety still exists, guys, but the main government is a republic with elected officials that speak for the people. And they actually have a special name for Robespierre's republic. It's called the Republic of Virtue. All right, now, keep in mind, all this is going on while the Reign of Terror is going on. But Robespierre, guys, is going to accomplish what I would call some pretty effective things that are pretty modern and Enlightenment leaning. But keep in mind, at the same time he's doing this, he's taking away freedom of speech and he's executing people sometimes without very much evidence. So, is it really that Enlightenment? That sounds like a great guys, that sounds like a great LEQ. How much was the revolution based on Enlightenment ideas? I'm going to think about that. Anyway, let's move on. So, France under Robespierre, it's called the Republic of Virtue. Now, remember, virtue means like moral ways of living a moral life and holding your life to high standards. All right, so now one of the first things the French did in this Republic of Virtue was they actually created their new calendar. They started a calendar. You know how, guys, in the West, we make our calendar marked on the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, right? Okay, like 0 AD was where the Roman Empire is where, well, not the Roman Empire, but it's where we started to make Western calendars, right? Even to this day, guys, we are living 2019 years from the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, right? All right, so AD, guys, means in the year of our Lord, all right, which was how we used to say things, and BC meant before Christ, right? Well, now in our modern secular state that we live in, we call things Common Era, which is like AD, and before the Common Era, BCE, all right, before Christ. Now, is it judging it by the same thing? Yes, it is. So instead of putting 0 at the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, what the French did is put 0, the year 0, or excuse me, the first year of the revolution, as the year the revolution started. The first day of the French Revolution, so July 14th, 1789, is year 1 of the revolution. So right now in 1793, they're in year 4. Okay? Anyway, they made up all new names for the months. All right, the one of them is going to be Thermidor. That's the one that you need to remember the most, and that's the month of July. It's called Thermidor. All right, we'll talk about what happens in Thermidor in a second. But anyway, so I saw, guys, on an AP a DBQ, guys, about the French calendar. It's really interesting. I doubt they'd ever do that one again, but they have done a DBQ about the revolutionary calendar. It's more like, well, you'll see. I'll show you later. But anyway, so the government was based on Enlightenment ideas, the Republic of Virtue, like in theory. Like I said, another Enlightenment idea was freedom of speech, and they're certainly throwing that out the window. But one of the ideas is all citizens are equal. Now, when they say equal, guys, what they really mean is like equal before the law. They don't mean equal in political rights. Peasants still can't vote. All right, only wealthier people who pay a certain amount of taxes are still allowed to vote. All right, but in general, according to law, all citizens are equal under the Republic of Virtue. But you still have, like we learned before, active citizens and passive citizens, right? But that is a good ideal that they all, push for. Let's say education for all, not education or all. So another idea of the French Revolution is everybody should be educated, from the lowliest peasant all the way up till the wealthiest person. Everybody should be afforded an education. Now, guys, I'll agree with that. I think everybody needs a basic education, and I think that's a good idea for the French Revolution to push for. Another thing is, like I said, one of the bad sides was the repression of women in the Republic of Virtue, because, like I said, they believed in Rousseau's separate spheres theory, and a virtuous government had women in the domestic role and men in the political role. All right. Now, one thing, guys, that the French Revolution did that the American Revolution didn't, and not even Great Britain did yet, is they abolished slavery. So, I guess the French Revolution can pat themselves on the back that they said from now on in France and all of its colonies, no more African slavery, or any slavery of that matter. So that's a very good thing, guys. Now, here is, hold on, let me see if I talk about something real quick. All right, now, here's where it gets kind of crazy. Now, one of the things they did, which are really going to piss a lot of people off, is the new government, and Robespierre was kind of against this, but the new government, guys, was so based on the Enlightenment that they basically said, from now on, we are going to get rid of Christianity in France. Now, gasp. What? France? Heavily Catholic? And guys, the government banished Christianity. It went so bad, guys, they would go through villages and towns to enforce it. The Committee of Public Safety's armies would, and destroy churches, guys. Burn them down. Sometimes they would kill priests and nuns that refused to stop preaching Jesus. Now, why were they getting rid of Christianity? Because they believed reason or deism was a far better thing to worship. So you guys know the Cathedral of Notre Dame, very famous cathedral. I went there. I think there's a picture of me hanging up on the, yeah, it's right there on the wall. It burned, a lot of it burned down recently. I got to see it before it burned down, thank goodness. Anyway, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, guys, is a very famous Parisian cathedral, right? Well, guess what? They didn't want to tear it down because the people are very sentimental. So instead, they changed it to the Temple of Reason. Yes, guys, the Cathedral of Notre Dame was called the Temple of Reason. Now, guess what happened with Christmas? You guys know how Christmas, right? The Catholic celebration and Protestant celebration of the birth of Jesus in the month of December 25th, right? What we are getting ready to celebrate in the West, a lot of people very soon. They changed it to basically the festival of the supreme being. All right. Now remember, guys, deists believe in a supreme being that doesn't get involved, right? So the cult of the supreme being, guys, was basically like the new religion of France. We're going to worship the supreme being. Why? Because most peasants that were still very Catholic, they would just shut up about it so they get guillotined. Most peasants, guys, could get behind it because in their minds they're still worshiping God, the supreme being. And the Enlightenment people could worship it because it was deism. All right. They, like I said, they got rid of Christmas and changed it to the festival of the supreme being. All right. But like I said, guys, Christianity was abolished for a while in France. The Catholic Church was kicked out, and all the priests either were told to stop preaching, and they did, or they were, executed for not abiding by the will. So, guys, that's what life is like in the Republic of Virtue. Now, there's some good things like getting rid of slavery and education for all. There's also some very bad things, obviously. Pause if you need to. Can you imagine that, guys? Going into the priests and nuns and wiping them out? Because, anyway, guys, pause if you need to. All right, last slide. Well, the end of the terror. What causes all of this to stop? Because this can't keep up, right? Well, guys, one of the things I ask my students, and I asked you this a long time ago. Remember, guys, back when we talked about Machiavelli, and I asked you, is it better to be loved or feared? You guys remember that? I'm hoping that you're nodding your heads yes. All right. So, guys, think about what we said. Is it better to be loved or feared? Some people say it's better to be feared because then people won't rise up against you because they're afraid of you. Well, let's see if that holds true. Well, here's what happens, guys. You see, Robespierre turned the Committee of Public Safety away from the countrysides and onto the people of the government that he thought might be a little too radical. Now, guys, this is when things go very wrong for Robespierre, because he starts going after members of his own government that he deems might be a little too radical. And guess where they end up? Madame la Guillotine. Right, now, one of the very famous people, the most famous to go to the guillotine under Robespierre, is George Danton. Now, you might remember George Danton was one of the early people of the revolution that really kicked the radical phase going. All right, he was like the radical guy before, he was like the Jacobin before Robespierre came to power. He's like the early guy. All right. Now, if you remember, guys, George Danton did go around and wipe out people that he thought were enemies of France in what were called the September massacres, I think. So anyway, guys, George Danton was accused of many things, among them profiteering, making money off the war. Another was he was accused of not being fully supportive of the war. And guess what? George Danton goes to the guillotine under Robespierre. Now, this shocked a lot of people. Like, oh my goodness, now Robespierre's going after the government? This is kind of sketchy. So Robespierre also started to pass laws which legalized convicting people without a lot of evidence. Think about that, guys. Remember the law of suspects? What if you just threw the law of suspects out and say, look, you don't have to have any evidence from now on in order to make sure that we get rid of the enemies of France. There's no trial. We just accuse somebody and they're guillotined. All right. Now, this is when people in the government started to go, wait a second. If he'll go after Danton, he'll go after any of us. So in a speech one time, in July 26th, I think. Yeah, Thermidor 26. Remember July, Thermidor? Thermidor 26, guys, 1794. He gets up and gives a speech where he starts saying that basically he knows that there are people in the government that are against him, and they will eventually be caught and be brought to justice. And that's when people are like, yeah, this guy's got to go. So the very next day, guys, his own people arrest him and vote to execute Robespierre by guillotine. So July Thermidor, 1794, Robespierre is arrested, and here, guys, is a very famous political cartoon drawing, whatever, of Robespierre himself going to the guillotine and getting his head chopped off. So, is it better to be feared? I don't know, but it didn't work out for Robespierre, did it? Now, this whole situation, guys, when Robespierre gets overthrown and killed himself, is called the Thermidorian reaction. Thermidor, it happened in July. And that, guys, is pretty much going to end the reign of terror. After Robespierre's death, the executions kind of calm down. Everything kind of slows down a little bit. And France kind of stabilizes for a while. All right? So anyway, guys, that's the end of the notes. I hope you guys have a good night. And don't lose your head.